Hello everybody, I'm Ajit K. Mishra, your course instructor for Essential Life Skills. I'm here again with all of you. This time I'm going to walk you through the world of a very important thinking skill, critical thinking. Along with creative thinking, critical thinking forms a lethal combination. If we have to succeed, if we have to do extremely well in life, both personal and professional, it's very, very important that we find ourselves in a position to combine creative thinking with critical thinking. So critical thinking is of critical importance. Before I talk about critical thinking in detail, let me start with a question. Have you ever felt trapped in fake news or planted news? Fake news is a major challenge, is a major problem today, because most often people become victims of fake news and they behave, they act irresponsibly on the basis of how they get influenced by fake news. So most of the times in social media, we come across planted news or fake news. But how often do we think about the news critically before transferring it or forwarding it to the next point or next person? Critical thinking is very, very important, because critical thinking will help us take care of ourselves, take care of our decisions, take care of our problems. And with critical thinking, we can solve a variety of problems, including the problem of the fake news. So in this session, you'll learn about some very important aspects associated with critical thinking. So let's start with this session. What exactly is critical thinking? To think critically is to examine ideas, evaluate them against what we already know, and make decisions about their merit. Similarly, the aim of critical thinking is to try to maintain an objective position. I must not allow my emotion to influence my approach to something. If I'm practicing critical thinking, I may not allow my emotion to figure in. So critical thinking will protect me against the undue or unnecessary interference of emotions. When we think critically, we generally weigh up all sides of an argument and evaluate its strengths and weaknesses. So critical thinking is all about examining. It is about adopting an objective approach. It is also about evaluating various things. So critical thinking is important because there are several life situations where this particular skill is absolutely essential. So how can somebody with good critical skills or critical thinking skills approach a problem? So if somebody has good critical thinking skills, the person understands the links between ideas. There are various ideas, and it's important that we understand the links between those ideas. We can determine the importance and relevance of arguments and those ideas, whether those arguments or ideas are relevant, important, can be determined. We can recognize, build, and appraise arguments. So if an argument is valid, for example, in fake news, we also get arguments, but we need to recognize, build, and appraise arguments. We have to recognize if an argument is valid or not. We'll have to build an argument out of that argument, and then we have to appraise, test that particular argument. We can identify the inconsistencies and the errors in reasoning. There may be fallacies, there may be errors or inconsistencies in certain arguments. If we are practicing or applying critical thinking skills, we can easily find them out. We can approach problems in a consistent and systematic way. This is one of the most important aspects of critical thinking, which allows us to approach a problem in a very systematic manner. In an unsystematic manner, we may be able to find a solution to a problem, but the probability of finding such a solution will be very, very less. And then we can reflect on the justification of the assumptions, beliefs, and values. For example, if I have certain assumptions, certain beliefs, and certain values, I can reflect on the justification of my assumptions, my beliefs, and my values. If I say somewhere, I believe, and then say something, with the help of critical thinking, I can justify whether my belief, my assumption, or my values are true or not, valid or not, reasonable or not. So that's the power of critical thinking. So good critical thinking has the following important aspects. Clarity is very, very important when it comes to critical thinking. Without clarity, there is no critical thinking at all. You cannot swim among the clouds. There has to be clarity. Accuracy, precision. There's something called precision engineering, which is doing the rounds these days. Precision engineering. Engineering is all about precision. Still, we have a precision engineering discipline, an emergent one. Consistency, relevance, sound evidence. Only evidence will not help. It has to be very, very sound. That means it must have the power to justify itself. Good reasons, depth, breadth, and fairness. All these aspects together make sound critical thinking. Let's take a look at the critical thinking process. But before I take you through critical thinking processes, let me start with an extract from a very famous short poem written by Rudyard Kipling, the writer who created Mowgli, Jungle Book. In his a poem with the title, My 6 Honest Serving Men. The poem has several other titles as well, because this is the first line of that poem. Kipling says, I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why, and when and how, and where and who. So these are my 6 honest serving men. They are not persons, they are approaches. They are techniques, they are my methods. And what are those methods? Those methods are what, why, when, how, where, and who. So all these methods help me gather the right kind of information and knowledge. So that's exactly what we mean by the critical thinking process. We must allow all these serving men inside all of us. They are not the serving men for Rudyard Kipling only. They all are within us. It's important that we know that we also have these serving honest serving men, 6 of them. And we must know how to make use of them. We must know how to send them all around, and we must know how to bring them back with the right kind of information and knowledge. We must know how to make use of them at every step of the thinking process. That's critical thinking. That's a process. How to think critically? We generally begin with a right approach to think critically. A right approach involves reason, which is based on logic, not feelings. Self-awareness, that is paying attention to the assumptions, biases and perspectives of one's own and that of the others. Integrity, so we carry out our intellectual work with honesty. Discipline, that means we always carry a good work ethic, and an open-mindedness. So we consider the other's point of view as well. So this is the first step in thinking critically. The second step is looking deeper and farther. It will not help to think critically when we are focused on the surface only. We must go deeper and farther. So we have to dive in and find all those things that lie beneath. So when we look deeper, we make inferences about an argument's hidden assumptions and values. And that's the benefit of diving deeper and farther. The next is to ask complex questions. Questions are very, very important when it comes to practice critical thinking. The first is, what is the problem? Once we know what the problem is, what are the different possible solutions to this problem? And which of these solutions seem most effective? What are the underlying assumptions and values? What is the nature of the relationship between this and that? That means one aspect and the other aspect. What exactly is the logical flaw in this reasoning? That means identifying the errors and flaws in that reasoning. So this is a very important phase. The next phase is to answer those questions. It doesn't help to ask questions only. In critical thinking, we must also stretch ourselves to find the right kind of answers. So when we begin to answer questions, we generally do so with the basis of analysis, that is breaking something into parts to better understand, that is analytical thinking. And then synthesis, making connections between the parts and the whole. And the next one is interpretation, that is examining these connections between the parts and the whole to make inferences about their implications and meanings. And finally, evaluation, that is forming judgments about meanings, qualities and values by justifying, critiquing, verifying and deciding. So these are the 4 most important approaches when it comes to answering questions. Critical thinking is very, very important because it allows us to reflect on the possibilities of finding a solution to a problem in a very systematic manner, in a structured manner. That means before we can think of finding the solution to any problem, we devise a comprehensive plan. We can see the various steps that we are going to adopt in order to approach a problem and in order to find a solution to that problem. So critical thinking helps us. Imagine in situations where decision-making, critical decision-making is involved. People who are at the helm of deciding they engage themselves in critical thinking. If they cannot engage themselves in critical thinking, it will mean that the error margin will gradually grow and it will become so broad that it will be unmanageable. So with the help of critical thinking, we can carry out some very important life functions, whether in our personal lives or in our professional lives. That brings us to the end of this session. I'm sure you have taken note of the various components of critical thinking that I talked about, and you're going to explore those components yet further on your own. And when you do that, I'm sure you are going to feel more and more confident about your critical thinking skills. I'll meet you again with some other very important aspects of critical thinking in my next session. Until then, bye-bye.